Defeat the digital Nazis, and Australia could be a manufacturing powerhouse. Coming up on today's Citizens Report. Welcome to the Citizens Report for the 10th of December 2021. I'm Elisa Barwick. Joining me today is Citizens Party Research Director Robert Barwick. Welcome.
Thanks, Elisa.
Now, on today's show, we're going to be discussing Australia beginning to discuss the implementation of a central bank digital currency.
Yep.
And some of the results coming out of the ongoing manufacturing inquiry. Now, if you like today's show, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe and hit the notifications bell so you're alerted to everything that comes out, and share it as widely as possible. Now, before we get into the main topics for the day, we have a couple of announcements, I believe.
So regular viewers who know Elisa, we've been very much involved with the Senate inquiry into the Sterling First scandal, which has left 140 elderly people facing eviction onto the streets, which ruined, they're financially ruined at the end of their life. There's been 2 hearings so far. There is a 3rd hearing that is really going to put ASIC on the spot, and it's on the 15th of December, which is on this coming Wednesday. And I tell you, tune in if you can. You can watch it online on the internet. Expect fireworks. This ASIC is going to have to account for what its terrible failings in this area. Politicians have the appetite to hold ASIC to account. So look forward to that. Just the other thing I wanted to mention is we talk about a lot of inquiries. There's currently an inquiry receiving submissions into the compensation scheme of last resort, and this is the scheme that the Commissioner Kenneth Hayne of the Banking Royal Commission recommended. And when the government set it up, they made it too narrow and they've excluded too many people, right? And they've put a cap on how much can be paid out in compensation. So there's a big fight over that. That's taking submissions until the 17th of December. We'll put the link to that below. All financial victims should make a submission to that, right? Demand that this actually become a proper compensation scheme. This will be a big issue for us going forward into the new year.
Right, so you've got several days to do that. It's a week away from recording date. So on to the first topic, defeat the digital Nazis. Now, one of the big campaigns and most successful campaigns we've run in the last couple of years is to defeat the ban on large cash transactions over $10,000.
Yep.
Where we took on the quote-unquote digital Nazis who say that all commerce should be electronic because it's more efficient, more convenient. Well, until it isn't. That's why we call them digital Nazis, at least. I mean, there's a vested interest involved, which you can talk about, but yeah, it fails too often. Yeah, when the electricity goes down, when there's a bushfire, when communications, internet is not available, all of a sudden, that whole convenience and efficiency goes down the toilet. So we had exposed during this campaign against the so-called cash ban that part of the agenda was to trap people in banks. And there's a number of reasons for that, including tracking all of our info, all of our data, but also so that people don't have an alternative to be locked into banks when the financial system crashes, which depends upon bailing in, i.e. stealing depositors' money and certain investments to keep the banks afloat. That's the new so-called paradigm, so that the financial system can keep going in perpetuity even though it's actually bankrupt, dead and gone long ago.
If you cannot use an alternative to banks, you will not escape bail-in. You will not escape if interest rates go negative. You'll not escape negative interest rates where they'll be taking money out of your account to pay them interest because they're holding your money. You won't be able to escape that. And this is the vested interest involved in pushing the cash ban. This is the banks. The banks want this.
That's a crucial mechanism of ongoing monetarist measures of control.
Plus, of course, they get a cut out of every transaction.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Right?
It's a big
and when they've got all transactions, they'll make that cut bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's just the way they make their money.
Yeah. So, one of the things we've maintained, there's nothing wrong with having the digital form for people that want to use it, but you have to have an inclusive financial system, and there's no substitute for cash under certain conditions and for certain categories of the population. So you have to maintain that. But there was an announcement this week from our esteemed Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, who announced that they are going to examine CBDC, central bank digital currency, and we'll just roll a clip where he made that announcement.
Well, we're working through with the Reserve Bank the feasibility of having a central bank digital currency in Australia. That would be world leading, and of course this is a fast moving area. There's a digital revolution going on in our financial sector. Cheques are nearly gone, cash is in decline, buy now, pay later, digital wallets and digital currencies are fast becoming the new norm. In fact, every single day in Australia, there are 55 million non-cash payments worth some 650 billion, and more than 800,000 Australians have actually had or owned cryptocurrency. So what we're seeking to do is modernise the payment system to broaden out the types of services and products that are governed by regulation. With respect to cryptocurrency, we want to take it out from the shadows, bring it into a considered regulatory framework. We want buyers and sellers that are businesses of those cryptocurrencies to have a financial licence that will give consumers a little bit more certainty and confidence about the parties that they're dealing with, and then of course work with the Reserve Bank about the feasibility of a central digital currency.
So there you have it. The way I described that, Elisa, is the digital Nazis that we were fighting on the cash ban are marching back, right? Now what Frydenberg is announcing is next year this will be a big part of the agenda. They're going to do consultations / inquiries into the central bank digital currency, etc. And we have to be prepared for that. And we'll talk about more of that in a minute.
Yeah, one of the good things that came out of this though, is in a press release that they put out announcing this, they did say, and I think they wouldn't have got away with not saying this, that they would also look at debanking. I mean, there's parliamentary inquiries that have been ongoing this year into issues of debanking as well, so it's been a hot topic. And the press release stated, as part of these reforms, the government will also investigate the feasibility of a central bank digital currency and seek to address the complex issue of debanking.
Yeah, it's only complex because they serve the banks, by the way. If you weren't...
Not really.
If you weren't subservient to the banks, it's not complex at all. No. Don't allow them to debank people. It's quite simple. If the business is illegal, don't debank it. We've actually played a big role in getting the spotlight on this, right? So I interviewed Paul Thomas from the cash and transit business owner who was debanked by Westpac. The first person to bring it to my attention is a golden bullion dealer here in Melbourne named Michael Kukulka. Brought it to my attention 2 years ago in the context of the cash ban. And we put a lot of attention on it, and politicians started paying attention. And in fact, sorry to divert a little bit here, but when we had the cash ban campaign, the first hearing was extraordinary, and debanking came up in that hearing, and it was Senator Rex Patrick and the late Senator Alex Gallagher did an excellent job in that hearing. And in fact, Alex Gallagher, we made a video, his performance was so good. He sat there all day and he asked all these government departments, what's your evidence for the need to ban cash? And they couldn't come up with any, right? And so when they saw that the government didn't, and people should learn that lesson going forward. When the government says they've got a plan for something, right, look into the details. So Alex Gallagher exposed that, and it's really sad he died recently, and they had a tribute to him in Parliament. I heard part of it, and there's a lot of outpouring of genuine emotion about him. And I didn't know him very much, except the one time we saw him in action, he was exceptionally good. So that was, rest in peace, Alex Gallagher. The debanking came up though, right? And that was the first time a lot of those senators heard of it. It was the first time I heard of it. And that has mushroomed or snowballed into Senator Andrew Bragg had a series of hearings on it. And now the Treasurer knows it must be addressed as well. That's the one good thing, the one positive in this announcement he made, right? So they're going to look at a whole bunch of things next year. Debanking will be one of them, and the rest is going to be something that we have to be much more combative about.
So, but the central bank digital currency is actually the big issue here though, because the Reserve Bank of Australia has stated pretty clearly that it won't support both digital currency and cash, because that would be too big of a burden to bear.
Suppose it, and there's a real problem. Now, let me just say, we want to reform the whole Reserve Bank as well, so it doesn't get to call the shots in these areas. It needs to be made into a national bank, and it will just do what the government damn well tells it to do. But at the moment, it's this all-powerful central banking institution, and that is what it said. And that's where it gets ridiculous, Elisa, because I understand, technology evolves, etc., and there may be some benefits to a central bank digital currency, but I think the reality is we put the cart before the horse. They're trying to address problems as if we're the Jetsons, when in fact, for many Australians, we're still the Flintstones. And here's the thing, until every square millimetre of Australia has 100% reliable electricity and no mobile phone or internet black spots, this is a joke. Because it's what you said earlier. It's fine until it isn't. And there's nothing more frustrating if you really need to make that purchase and all your technology fails and you cannot do it. And I had a parallel incident in Sydney yesterday when I needed to fill up the hire car before dropping it off at the airport, and I picked a road to go down assuming there'd be a petrol station. There wasn't, right? And I'm getting more and more frustrated. Where are the petrol stations? Because when you really need something and you can't do it, right? And that's what happens when the power fails. We got involved in the Christine Holgate issue, as most people know, and we got the parliamentary inquiry up. One of the things Christine Holgate did when she overhauled the Bank at Post service at Australia Post was to make sure it supported cash, because she understood cash is very, very important. In the bushfires, the big bushfires at the start of 2020, whole sectors of southern New South Wales lost their power. People needed to shop, they needed to get fuel. The only place they could go was the local post office to get cash, right? And that's the reality. And while they can crap on about all this stuff, digital stuff, as much as they like, the real world, people need cash. Don't you dare ban it.
Yeah, it's pie in the sky until then. But ABC Radio, I think it was, put a survey up the other day on Facebook, and it said, with bank branches and ATMs disappearing across Australia and cashless payments becoming the norm, we want to know, when was the last time you used cash? And it was interesting to look at some of the comments. I think there was over 1,500 a few days ago, so who knows how many there are now. But people affirming we need to have the ability to use cash overwhelmingly. Because
you saw the Treasurer before, he just rattles off the statistics about, people aren't using much cash anymore. Yeah, because the banks are denying it to them, right? They're ripping out ATMs. They've ripped out a third of Australia's ATMs in the last 5 years. They want to stop people using cash. And yeah, sure, flashing around the card or your phone's convenient, but if the banks weren't hurting people in this direction, even more people would use cash. In fact, as you know, since we've been on the cash ban campaign, and you realise the Reserve Bank essentially said, we will supply cash as long as there's demand for it. So it really is use it or lose it. I use cash more than ever, right? And now I'm back in the swing of using cash, and yeah, I fully prefer it, and I see why people do. And whenever I'm at a shop and it's a genuine small business and I say, what do you prefer? They tell me they prefer cash. And not because they're avoiding tax, they're avoiding bank charges.
Yeah. Now, of course, as you mentioned, the real solution to this is moving into the manifold of national banking, with a crucial subset of that being transforming Australia Post into an actual postal people's bank. And we put out a press release on the 9th of December headlined, "Let's make a postal bank an election issue." And so we're going to be going hard on this topic. We've already been asking people, as our regular viewers know, to flood the Regional Banking Task Force, which is a government task force to investigate the shutdown of regional banks, up to the limits of the CBDs of every city, basically. With calls for a postal bank, we need to flood them by the 18th of December.
We've got, one of the things I want people to think about in this regard, you actually wrote an article for our Australian Alert Service magazine a week or so ago about a parallel proposal discussion in the United States where Joe Biden's appointee, who's since withdrawn, to the bank regulator to be the bank regulator over there, she also has talked about a central bank digital currency, etc. And the point you made in your article is she actually had some sound reasons for saying problems need to be addressed. And you said, instead of going down this digital path, it would be much more easily and more straightforwardly addressed with proper financial reform, including a national bank, right? And same thing for Australia. Let's make sure the basics work before we start carrying on with all this pie in the sky Jetson stuff, right? And the basics are have a sound banking system, and we need to break the monopoly of the big four banks. We need to guarantee financial services in every community. We need to guarantee financial security for those financial services, i.e. the deposits people put in the banks, right? Guarantee the banking services so people don't get debanked, right? And only a government institution can't discriminate. And the solution, therefore, is a government bank. So we've been saying this. This week, on Wednesday actually, the Queensland Country Life put out this great article, 1 in 4 regional bank branches have shut since 2017. This is about the Regional Banking Task Force, and they're pointing that out. They also point out how much it's stacked. The task force is going to be stacked by the Banking Association and the Big Four banks. There's someone from local government there, and there's someone from Australia Post there. But Anna Bligh from the Australian Banking Association, what does she say about banking services? Why the banks can shut all their branches in regional areas? Oh, people are using electronic banking. That flies in the face of everything we've just been talking about. I won't rant and rave about it, but especially in regional Australia, electronic banking cannot be relied upon, right? That's just rubbish. And so the people from regional Australia, including National Party Senator Perrin Davey, National Party Senator Bridget McKenzie, who actually know what regional communities need in this regard, said no, they need bank branches. So Bob Katter's son, was quoted, and he just cut through all the noise to say, let's have a postal bank.
I think it's worth reading what he said because it gives you an insight that this is not only us saying this, it's, our ideas are being reflected out there everywhere. He said, without waiting for an inquiry, why don't we just express our views publicly in regards to the direction we should move towards instead of waiting for a report that may never deliver anything?
Just before you go on, and that is true. That's why we say we cannot let this regional task force be a talk fest. That's why we must flood it with submissions, and I'll say that more in a minute.
Mr. Katter said the answer to regional banking issues and to questions pertaining to rural development more broadly was a government-owned or backed bank. To make initiating this process simpler, you could consider a model that has some of the necessary infrastructure already in place, he said. For example, Australia Post was considering a model of this nature, which would be the perfect vertical alignment for their operations. He said,
he was referring to Christine Holgate when he said that.
Her proposal, yeah. He said bank lenders could operate out of Australia Post offices similar to how it's done in New Zealand through the NZ Post and its Kiwi Bank. The beauty of this solution is that it is more likely to make money for the taxpayer than burden them. Ultimately, this model could be highly beneficial to the government's bottom line. Indeed.
Now, and Elisa, I didn't tell you this yet, but the Citizens Party got an email this morning based on our press release that you referred to earlier about let's make the postal bank an election issue. And the press release came from Switzerland. And it's an Australian living in Switzerland who saw the press release referenced the fact that Switzerland was one of the countries that Christine Holgate visited to see how they had combined postal and banking services successfully. And he said, I want to tell you as an Australian living here, that's right. And he actually talked about how great it is, but he also talked about how the bankers' agents now want it privatised, right? And Switzerland has citizens-initiated referenda, which means if the bankers' agents try and do that, the Swiss people will be able to get up a referendum and vote on it, and they'll never let that happen, right? They do not want that privatised at all.
And just on this issue of how Robbie Katter said, you can't wait for an inquiry to come along and decree it because there's actually been a lot, and we've covered this in the Australian Alert Service, there's been a lot of inquiries into regional banking issues been going on for decades, but Dale Webster, who's an independent journalist who put together some brilliant material on her website, the Regional, she did an interview on ABC Regional Radio on Tuesday. She also did a background piece of what everyone should know when they're making a submission to the committee, where she went into this inquiry, I should say, which she went through a lot of the background as well of these various inquiries that have come and gone, and the banks have made all the promises in the world oh yes, we'll go along with that recommendation, etc., and none of them ever come to fruition.
Melissa Harrison from our organisation wrote in the Australian Alert Service a 3-part series as well on this, and that's going to comprise our submission. But Dale has done more dedicated work in this area than anybody, and so you're right, she knows all the inquiries. The clip we're about to play, I just want to hear a little bit of her interview with ABC Regional Radio on Tuesday. What they're talking about is the inquiry that matters the most, and it was the Campbell report in 1982, because this is the inquiry that set the scene, and that report foreshadowed, because it demanded privatisation of all public banks, including the Commonwealth Bank. And when it did that, it said, when that happens, banks will start shutting their branches. That report said that as if it was a good thing, right? So, and that has led Dale to conclude, like us, that there is benefit in a public bank. So just listen to this.
Can we, people listening this morning, can we just step it through, unpack a little of what you just had to say, Dale, in terms of people listening this morning possibly won't really need a very long memory to remember that it wasn't that long ago, I guess, that there were banks that were owned by state governments, and were heavily regulated by them. But it was that first report, that Campbell report, that sort of undid all of that and set us down this path.
Yeah. I think the sale of the government banks is probably, if there was one thing that's happened that has led us to this situation, I think it's that. Because Campbell and the political philosophy of the day was that government banks weren't competitive with the private sector bank, and I think the private sector banks did some pretty heavy lobbying at the time to get it all onto a level playing field. So I don't want to lay all the blame on coalition governments, because it was actually the Hawke era Labor governments, Hawke-Keating Labor governments, that implemented all of these changes. So everyone's to blame.
Does your trawling through the history of this sorry tale in regional Australia give you any cause for optimism, Dale?
No.
Right.
There's some good initiatives floating around. There's talk of a postal bank. I don't know a lot about it, but if that was a government-owned initiative, I think that would be something that people could pin their hopes on.
And the reason the public bank will be the solution to regional bank closures, Elisa, is because it'll force the private banks to compete. That's why the Campbell report said if we privatise the Commonwealth Bank and take the competition away from the private banks, they're going to stop worrying about competing on service. If you have an excellent banking facility in every post office in Australia, right, the private banks will go, we're going to start losing millions of customers to this public bank.
That's right.
If we don't keep our branches open, right? That's why, for the specific problem of regional branch closures, let's have a postal bank.
Absolutely. Now, you also addressed this week a Shire Council in Queensland on this subject.
Yep, and I think modern technology is excellent. It was like being in the room. I'm in Melbourne. I was addressing the Livingston Council. They gave me half an hour. It was, they paid a lot of attention. They had done a lot of homework. There's a momentum building here now where, and local government is going to have to be a driver of this, right? So it's good there's a local government representative on the task force. We need to get all local government involved. So if wherever you're watching from, contact your council and say, are you aware of this banking task force? Are you aware of a postal bank? You need to get behind the campaign to call for it. Bob Catter, Robbie Catter's dad, has been our collaborator on this, and he's ready to go with legislation, but he's being blocked by the parliamentary rules. We need a groundswell of support behind the policy, so that when he goes to introduce it, all those parliamentarians know that we might have to jump on board this one.
So make your submission by the 18th. And on to our next topic. Australia could be a manufacturing powerhouse, and these are related issues, because one of the key things becomes the financial framework in which our manufacturers exist. So in the course of recent months, there's been a Senate inquiry into manufacturing, and they've held hearings. They did receive an extension, so their report is due on the 17th December. So there's a lot of things happening at the end of next week in the countdown to the end of the year. But we wanted to have a look at, there's been a number of hearings, there's a lot of interesting testimonies in those hearings, but I wanted to focus on one in particular that came out in the first series of hearings, and that is from the testimony from the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre Managing Director, Dr. Jens Gernemann. And this is a body that was established by the government to foster the manufacturing industry, which is why his comments are rather interesting in the way that he basically points out that the government is going about this, all the wrong way. Now, he started off citing a Harvard University study, which we've cited many times in our own publications, which ranks Australia as the 8th richest country in the world, yet found that it was the 86th ranked country in terms of its complexity.
You rest your voice. I want to talk about this for a second. This is we'll put up the graphic they have on their website, the Harvard Atlas of Economic Complexity. Because economic complexity means what are you capable of making, right? And like some of the countries on this list, I think the 8th is Czechoslovakia, a landlocked country, doesn't have a lot of resources. It has no choice but to make stuff, right? Australia suffers from this disease where we are drowning in resources and wealth, and we are the laziest economy in the world. Not the laziest people, the laziest economy. And we weren't always this way. This is the way to understand how outrageous and unjustifiable this is don't just compare us to other countries, compare us to ourselves 50 years ago.
Well, actually,
right?
We were number 55 on this list, Dr. Gernemann pointed out, in 1995. So we went from 55 to 86.
Yes.
Just in those few years.
And how did we do it? We just started digging stuff out of the holes in the ground and shipping dirt overseas. Mm-hmm. And actually, you'll see it. Have a look at the map there. And if you can take the bar down to 1995, and you can see the colour of Australia there, which is I think it's light blue. Go to the current time, right? And we are now down at the level of some of those African countries, right? Yep. And that's not through it. It's not their fault they're in that position, but it's our fault we're in our position, right? And what happens is you become completely dependent on your importer, on the countries that are importing your goods. And if supply chains break down, if you have a global pandemic, all sorts of stuff, right?
Yeah.
You can shoot yourself in the foot.
And Dr. Gernemann shows there's a direct link between the complexity of your economy and future income. So you're just cutting yourself off at the feet if you don't take that into consideration. But he identified 4 key elements if we want to get a really successful, thriving manufacturing industry in this country: the government, public service, research, and the industry itself. And there's a few things to point out in each of these subsections, and I'll show a clip from him in a moment talking himself. But when it comes to government, he blasted the way they operate. He said, look, they need a 20-year plan and they need to stick to it. Stop coming up with half-baked things and changing them after each election. And the other thing he pointed to is the government rely on grants. So they give these grants, but there's no follow-up. It's just doling out a bit of money here and there. There's nothing to pursue to make sure that goes somewhere and to make it happen. The public service is a key thing because, of course, our public service has literally fallen apart. It's been stripped of capabilities because of outsourcing, and we've written much about this, as have other people, in independent Australian media. There's actually another Senate inquiry that has been going on and has put out their final report, and it's called for a formal cap on outsourcing of public sector roles. The chair of this committee, the Finance and Public Administration References Committee, Senator Tim Ayres, and he's the ex-state secretary of the Australian Manufacturing Workers Union, pointed out that billions is spent each year on private consultants rather than using the public service. Yep. Much of it is to overseas companies. And he described the consulting industry as having opaque contracts, no accountability, hiding their profits offshore, and as being rent seekers and ticket clippers.
And let me just say that 4 of those, the biggest consulting firms in the world, are the big 4 auditing firms: KPMG, Ernst & Young, PricewaterhouseCoopers, etc. No one audits them.
No.
They earn billions all over the world from governments. They control the tax system because they're the world's auditors. They park it in offshore centres. They are the auditors for every other company. No one audits them, right? Senator Peter Whish-Wilson of the Greens has asked this in Parliament. Who audits the auditors, right? Yet, and they combine it with consulting, and they make squillions that way as well.
Research is the next one he mentioned. Now, I wanted to point out the fact that we've had collaboration with various people who have pointed out to us that Australia has one of the highest rates of international collaboration on research, and in particular research papers.
We have
many countries.
We've got 0.4% of the world's population, but we produce 4% of the world's academic research, and we do that because we leverage our collaboration with other countries. Our government does not fund research properly here, right? So what our universities do, and the smart academics in them, and this is across the board, is they collaborate with the best funded research around the world, which happens to be at the top of that list nowadays happens to be China.
Yeah,
Elisa,
we'll put some graphs up showing that.
Well, what you can see in the graph there, especially the one with the blue line overtaking the green line. The green line is the United States, and everyone expects the United States, high standards of research. But China is so committed to being technological breakthroughs, right? It is researching like crazy, and it's because China is our number one collaborator in research that our universities have been able to do so well in the research area. That's all been demonised at the moment, of course.
And I just wanted to mention the Morrison government, and again we wrote about this in the Australian Alert Service, which you can find out how to subscribe to get all this good information. I'm not the editor. But the Morrison government put out this blueprint for critical technologies, which is supposed to make Australia a world leader in technological revolution. But the blueprint is entirely framed in this whole national security context about protecting us from our competitors.
Yeah.
Doesn't name China, but and talks about how critical technologies are advancing the threat against quote unquote liberal democratic values. And yet most of it is not about so-called dual use technologies. I mean, it's a whole sector, including research and development on 63 rapidly developing technologies. And the upshot, as quoted by the Sydney Morning Herald, is that such collaboration could be blocked, or such research could be blocked from being shared with Chinese universities and firms as the federal government looks to stop Beijing from gaining dominance across a range of emerging sectors. So we're actually sabotaging the kind of collaboration and research that would assist, as Dr. Gurneman points out, the advancement of our manufacturing. And the final thing he mentioned was industry. And in regard to the industry itself engaging in advancing our manufacturing sector, look, he said it's not about picking winners, etc. He said, look, we're already winners. We're actually very, very good at what we do. But the sector is just too small. And the other thing he pointed to is that we need real investment, not just grants again. And he talked about, which I thought was interesting, that manufacturing is a mindset. It's not actually some separate sector that you can think of as separate to the economy. It's a mindset, and an economy will only function if it's the bedrock of the economy. So with that said, I want to roll the clip of just a few of the remarks he had to say at the outset of his testimony.
Thank you. What do Australian governments need to change in order to become a manufacturing powerhouse?
Government is one of 4 pillars for manufacturing. The other pillars are research, the public service, and industry. First of all, I do believe that industry needs to lead the charge. Government needs to support. The first thing government needs to do in support is to be consistent, have a plan and stick to it for 20 years. The plan doesn't need to be perfect, but needs to be good enough to be successful and stick to it. Number one. Number two, the manufacturing capability in Australia needs two things: more complexity. Needs three things: more complexity, more scale, and more focus. Let me explain. We have 47,000 manufacturers, and 85% employ less than 20 people. We are subscale. We need to help manufacturers, especially the most capable and best of them, to scale and grow and have more muscle. We are too small. We don't have the medium-sized companies in Australia, which is the backbone for every successful economy. We have a few big ones. Some of them call themselves manufacturing and cannot even define manufacturing correctly. And then we have 47,000, and many of them way too small. We need to scale, help them scale. Number two was in regard to focus. A country of Australia, like many other little countries with a population of 25 million, does too many things at the same time. We need to focus. This is not called picking winners. This is about elaborating on what we are already good at. We are already winners. And the concept of Australia to having defined 6, wait for it, national manufacturing priorities, not 6 priorities, not defense, not space, not food and agri priorities, but national manufacturing priorities, is great. It says two things. Number one, it is a horizontal of manufacturing, which is a prefix of these 6 verticals. This is focus, and this is a manufacturing mindset. Manufacturing, by the way, is not a sector, it's a capability, and I would even say it's a mindset. So the focus on these 6 national manufacturing priorities, they might not be perfect, but they are good enough not to do everything a little bit, but focus on areas where we are already good at, or where we have chosen to be good at it. That is the second thing. And the third thing is to use government policies within the decision-making of government and the public service to working with industry to take these initiatives which are successful. Australia is obsessed with grants, throwing money at something and hope it sticks. Usually it doesn't. But the difference when an initiative is industry-led and a grant is co-invested, as we do at the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Center, as we co-invest with applicants, with the best applicants, informed by our research, and go milestone by milestone with industry practitioners and check whether they do what they say they will do in these projects, keeps them honest. That is the magic difference between just a grant, fire and forget, and checking homework and making sure that the co-investment for the advancement of factory manufacturing is happening. And last, I said there are 4 areas: government, public sector, public service, industry, and research. Australia has great research. Australia spends 60% of their research money in technology readiness level number 2. Now, there are 9 technology readiness levels. 1 is an idea, 9 the realization of it. If we continue spending all our firepower in the first 3 steps, a great idea will never come to the commercialization. It is followed by the technology readiness of 4 to 8, the so-called commercialization valley of death. We are overfunding our early research. We are underutilizing our ability to see it through and have the manufacturing outcome at the very end.
Now, a crucial part of the government's role in this, and broader, is there needs to be a real vision for the future of what we want this country to look. This is what it means to have a 20-year plan, and this is what China's very good at doing. They look into the future and say, this is where we want to be in 20 or 50 years, and you set your sights on that. And, and a great example of this, high-speed rail. I mean, Australia has 0 kilometres of high-speed rail. Think about what that would do to manufacturing, especially in this era where we have to make sure we've got what we need in terms of supply chains and produce locally. So I'll put up an image here. This is the new bullet train that is sitting in the station in the capital of Laos. And on the 3rd of December, they inaugurated a new 414 kilometre high-speed railway. So here's a little old country in Southeast Asia with over 400 kilometres of high-speed rail, while we have none. And this was a Belt and Road Initiative project.
And Elisa, last year we did a section of our show, an episode of our show on the old Sydney to Melbourne very fast train proposal from the 80s, which was scoped out by the finest minds in Australia at the time. It was the bean counters in the Keating government that eventually killed it. That could have gone around the coast from not straight through, so it's going to go around the coast to help build up the population density in those areas rather than just Sydney, right? And the people who did that work, they went and looked around the world at different possibilities, different proposals, and it was these technical experts in Australia that first scoped out the idea of a Beijing to Shanghai fast train line, and that did evolve into an actual fast train line. It was the first link that China built, and that was by 2008. And since then, they've got 36,000 kilometres of it. They're building it in other countries like Laos, and we still haven't got one, right? So, look, we've got to get our act together. We need to back these ideas and make them work, and the talent is there to make it happen.
We've got another great example of that in the alert service this week.
This is a left field idea that just shows you the brilliance that's in Australia. So there's a proposal for Albany in Western Australia for a spaceport. There's a lot of demand for space launches. There's actually a space rush at the moment, and April Walker is a mining and construction engineer. She just happens to love space. She's a space enthusiast, and she was, when she's not doing her work in mining and construction, she was thinking about this, and she saw that how much effort goes into launches of rockets for satellites, etc. And what happens is the company that develops the rocket technology or the satellite technology, that's the specialised technology. But then they have to put a lot of resource into actually having a launch site for it. And she said, well, why can't someone take care of that permanently, provide permanent infrastructure? And she has, from nowhere, she's developed this idea with just a handful of collaborators. It's now being supported by the WA government. It's being supported by big engineering firms in Australia, backed by one in the United States, backed by a Canadian satellite company. And this, she hopes to get Australia back into space launches by 2024, and if she achieves that, it'll be the first time since the 1960s that we've launched into space from Australia, and it all started with her brainwave, right? And finally convincing the authorities to this should be supported. We need to support all those kind of initiatives, right? Let's just transform the country in a positive way, and that's how we'll get manufacturing back and all those things that we've lost.
It'll change the face of our economic situation very fast, even just getting it going from, point zero moving on.
So before we conclude, I just want to emphasise the opening story, the Regional Banking Task Force, right? The submissions close on the 18th of December. Every single viewer, click on the link below, just send them an email. Don't make it sophisticated, or make it as sophisticated as you want. We want to flood this task force. Yeah. It's stacked with bankers, and they're going to try and suppress it. We want those politicians to get so many emails saying, we want a postal bank, that when they produce their report, they have to acknowledge, well, that is an alternative that's there to address this problem. So everybody, please make a submission. You got till the 18th of December. Stop watching. As soon as you finish watching this video, make it straight away.
Yeah, don't put it off and think, I need to do more research or something. Just go do it.
Just tell them, we want a postal bank.
Yeah. So that's all we've got time for this week. Contact us for more information. Get a complimentary copy of the alert service to find out more. Join us as a member. And don't forget to hit the like button and share as widely as possible, because that helps get the word out. So thanks, Robert.
Thanks, Elisa.
Thanks for tuning in, and see you next week.